will host an interactive discussion with Dr. Sam Chand on the topic Transitions in Leadership. This will then be followed by the segment you've been waiting for, your questions and answer segment. Please don't wait for them to finish before you send your question ahead. You can send a question, keep it very direct, and let's know who you are addressing the question to. There are 3 ways you can do that. First, you can scan the QR code on the screen and send your question with your name. Secondly, if you're watching us online or on any of the channels, kindly send your question through the comment section on the stream. The third way is in person here in the auditorium. Kindly line up behind the microphones at the time that we will indicate, and I'll let you know when that time comes. At this point, Doulos 2025, kindly help me welcome conference host Pastor Mensa Otabil. Let's put our hands together as he comes.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. We will just chat for a bit, and then your questions will come in. So questions can be on both sessions, my session and his session, and we'll do our best to answer them. Doc, so when you talked about 480,000 people not preaching in the next 5 years, what did you mean? Are they going to die, or what's going to create the vacancy?
It's mostly going to be people aging out.
Aging out.
Some will die, of course. Yes, but mostly aging out.
Okay.
Boomers, if you want to call it boomers, are that whole generation that is aging out. And the other thing that's happening is pastors are also finding their too earlier in life, because we have models. I can tell you at least 15, 20 pastors who started doing what I do because I was their consultant in their mid-50s, because they said to themselves, that is my too. So they had to leave from. So it's going to be a mixture of it, but mostly aging out.
Aging out. That means they are probably close to a retirement age.
Correct.
And they're going to go
correct.
on. So in your thinking, what should be the right time a pastor should start thinking of a transition?
I've changed my mind on that, and I suggest to pastors, think 55, then you'll probably do it by the time you're 65, because that's how pastors are. They like to procrastinate using the name of the Lord. So, because if you say 65, you'll kill your church at 80. You don't want to be walking into the walker, shuffling into church, drooling from one side, forgetting to put in your dentures, and preaching.
So there are people who are going to say, but they're very successful pastors in the pulpits in their 80s and so on. Isn't 55 too early and 65 too early?
So I happen to know most of those pastors in the large church sphere. They have created a strong infrastructure. So they are not doing any administration. They are not going to any meetings. They don't even keep an office at the church. They just become the preacher, teacher, the spiritual apostolic leader of the church. But even then, you know, I don't care who you are as a pastor. You are temporary. You will leave.
Yeah.
You, 100% of pastors will leave their church. There's not 99%, 100%.
100%.
Will leave their church. Now, it's better to leave on your own 2 feet than 8 grown men carry you out in a box. So, because I've seen the same thing you have seen, people build great churches and they destroyed it with their own hands. And these pastors that you're talking about have built amazing internal infrastructures. So they don't carry the weight they used to carry.
Yeah.
They just carry the spiritual weight of the church.
So let's go to what you said in terms of raising a leader. And I suppose succession is not only at the senior pastor level, it's systematic. The band leader, choir leader, everybody will be replaced at one point or the other, so it should be a system through the church. But you said it's heart, head, hand. The easiest thing is hand. Do what I do. But how do you train people to have your heart?
I think the only way to do that is what Jesus did. So it's very interesting, people who have studied the Gospels and the walk of the strategic walk for 3.5 years with his inner circle, with his 12 apostles, was people who have studied that tell us for the first 3 years of the 3.5 years, he dealt with heart. But that had proximity. The last 6 months was more do this and do this and do this. There's no substitute for time, proximity, accessibility, in which you earn the right to speak into somebody's life. And I think that is where pastors have to become more intentional about A, who they are spending time with or investing time in, and B, how have they organized that so it really, really happens. But to your other point that you started with, I think if succession becomes the culture of the church, then you don't have to say to somebody, hey, you've been doing really good in the choir, but I think God is promoting you too. You know how we tell people. You don't have to do that because they are thinking, I have a responsibility to not only come in right, but transition right.
So when we talk about the heart, whose heart are we talking about? Is it the heart of the pastor, the heart of Christ? Especially if the pastor has a crooked heart. Does he impart the crooked heart? So how do we draw the balance between what the pastor is passionate about and his ethos and what is central to the Christian faith that is Christ?
That's a really big question, because I don't know of a single pastor who does not have a wounded heart. I wrote a book called Leadership Pain. You know, if you are leading, you are bleeding. You will not grow beyond the threshold of your pain. So every pastor is simply dealing with people. Keep the devil and everything out of that. Simply dealing with people leads with a wounded heart. And I'm hoping that not only will the pastor give his or her healed heart, as well as the heart of Christ. Let this be in you as even with Christ Jesus. So I think, like my father, he was a pastor. I knew his heart. He never sat down and said, now, let me tell you something about my heart. I just watched him. I saw how he overcame things, how he started things, how he ended things, how he treated people with respect. I just learned his heart. Because the heart cannot be taught, but it can be learned. And so if you were to hire me today to do whatever, to run the camera, I would want to learn your heart. Who is Pastor Mensa Otabil? What makes him tick? What brings him joy? What brings him disappointment? What makes him happy? What makes him angry? I would want to become a student of the pastor. And that's what a disciple was. Unfortunately, in our churches now, people are a student of the position, not the pastor.
I had a conversation with a conflicted young pastor, and he has a spiritual father figure that he looks up to. And of course, you look up to somebody is because they do something you like. But then you also see some things you don't like. So he says to me, I don't know what to do, because he talked about the person and he says he's amazing, he's good, all the superlatives. But then he says to me, he has broken every rule in the book. Everything the Bible says we should not do, he has done it. And he still seems to be getting along. And it's like you're expecting that, well, if the Bible says don't do this and he does it, something will go wrong with him. But he seems to be getting along. And so he says, I'm not sure. So what should I do? Should I follow what is wrong? Because part of him or his heart is not in the right place with the Lord. But then there is a part of his heart that seems to be getting results, so to speak. How do you help a potential successor being mentored, coached, fathered, to draw this balance between a heart that is off from the Lord and a heart that is close to the Lord? And which one, what should I follow?
So before I answer, let me give you a disclaimer. I'm not doing question and answer. I'm doing question and response. I have no answers. I just have a response. Okay. If I could reflect back on your teaching, the SWOT analysis of the charismatic church, first of all, wasn't that amazing? Wasn't that amazing? Wow. And you know, not everyone can say what he said. You gotta have credibility to be able to say what you said. One of the things that a charismatic church has done, charismatic leaders especially, we are attracted to people's gifts. He's a great preacher. I don't care how he lives. So we are attracted to gifts. So if someone is looking for a father, I think the question is not, can I preach like him? Do I want to be like him? Do I want to act like him? Do I want to have a family like him? Do I want to have a marriage like him? Do I want to treat people like him? Because I have known many, many pastors who are abusive to their people, and they talk down to them, and they are the senior pope and everybody else is down here. So I think it is not what a person does, but how they are attracted to that. Now, I don't know of a single human being that doesn't have feet of clay. You know somebody long enough, it doesn't matter who it is, eventually they will disappoint you. Now, there's a difference between disappointing and living a life that is unbiblically wrong. And at that time, you have to make a choice, a decision, as to if you're going to be receiving, because we know this, that what fathers do in moderation, sons do in excess. And it flows in churches. I've seen when the senior pastor gets divorced, there are constant divorces in the church. When something is going on here, you know, when the Bible said the anointing flows from the top of the head to the bottom, so does dysfunction. Everything flows that way. I had one person like that in my life. He's gone on to be with the Lord. He was not doing anything sinful, but he was doing something unethical that I felt compromised the gospel. And the way I'm wired, I said, can we talk? And I sat down with him, and I said, with great humility and great respect, I'm observing this. Help me understand that. Because I actually honored him, did not come accusing, did not being disrespectful. I said, I'm observing, this is my observation, I owned it. Help me understand this. Portions of it he helped me understand. Portions of it, even as he was talking, did not make sense to him. And I can tell you, from that day on, my relationship with him shifted. And that was a very painful thing. So every one of us in this room has disappointed somebody. We live another day, we'll disappoint somebody else. But I think we have to have the courage to have that conversation as well. Last thing about that. A lot of times, fathers really don't even know their sons and daughters. They don't even know their names. I know that for a fact. I've been there when they said, Dr. Chen, who's that guy coming? Who's that guy coming? And I remember saying to one of them, saying, he sends you a check every month, doesn't he? Should you not know his name? So they don't have that. I think sons sometimes think they have a greater relationship with the father than fathers have with their sons and daughters. So something is broken because we have made it transactional rather than relational. And when it's relational, you can have conversations. Not accusatory, but you can have honoring, respectful conversations. So this gentleman you're talking about, if he does not have that conversation, it'll be unfinished business.
Yeah, so how does that connection take place then between the person who is transitioning and who is coming in, who recognizes who? How is the connection made? Who approaches whom? And what if the right successor is not in the circle of the one who is transitioning, as it was in Israel, where David was not in the circle of probables? How does a leader then discover who is not in the circle but who must be discovered? And how is the person who is outside of the circle get himself noticed, if there is anything like that?
In my experience, Dr. Otabil, I have learned very, very, very rarely does the successor think he's the successor. In fact, the successor should be surprised that he's the successor. She's a successor. So in almost all cases, it is, I don't want to call him or her the predecessor, but the person there right now sees that person. The ideal candidate for someone like, and I write about that in my book, Tsunami, that many of you are getting. The ideal candidate is what we call the insider, outsider, insider. That means they were with you, they were in your circle, they were at your church, they were in your fellowship. Then they either reposition themselves, you send them away to another branch somewhere, they started another church, whatever happened, they became an outsider, not in a pejorative way, but in a practical way. They became an outsider, and then they come back as an insider. And there are a number of benefits to that. Number one is, when they go out, all of a sudden they recognize it's not as easy as you made it look. You know, coming up with a message or 3 messages every week to the same people who have heard the same stories again and again is no joke. Taking care of everything that is there. So they have a greater appreciation for you. Number 2, even more importantly, is they get slapped around by church folk. They run into a wall. They discover the meanness that is in the church, the disappointments that are in the church, and nothing can prepare you for being a pastor than a good thrashing by church people. creates a sense of humility.
That's the road and the staff of the Lord.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the discovery road. And when they come back, they understand the culture of the church. They have great honor and respect, insider, outsider, insider. The other thing that I say to my own shame is, I was born and raised in a Pentecostal pastor's home. I'm Pentecostal, charismatic, full gospel, all of that. And for some reason, because of the kind of work that I do, I did not, this is a terrible thing to say, I forgot, let's put it like that, I forgot the God factor. I forgot that God is at work. That this person is outside my circle, I don't even know they exist, but God is big enough to relocate them in such a way that I can see them. And the God factor is more than words, is more than mere prayer. It is saying, God, if you don't show me, I can't see. If you don't approve, it's set for failure. Give me a heart of discernment. And I have seen miracles take place that people who are not even on the radar, God started pulling them up. The last thing I would say about that is, if you are in this room and you're looking for a successor, I would not start with a person. I would start with a profile. Not a person, a profile. Because if you have a person in mind, all of your analysis, all of your thinking, all of your organization, all of your planning will be about that person, which makes it a very small conversation. A larger conversation is, what kind of a person does this church need? Not for now, but for next. Because the next pastor following you may be nothing like you. So you are trying to create a profile for the next. So the profile might be something like, again, it's in all my books, Tsunami, it's all there, in which we want this person to be in their mid-40s. Because if you get somebody in their 60s, they're ready to succeed all of a sudden. Mid-40, I'm making this up. It could be 30. Jesus started when he was 30. And I can tell you this, our children are smarter at their age than we were at their age. So how old do we want this person to be? Married, children, experience, education, track record. Create a profile. And once you create a profile, you start seeing more of that. Give you an example. If you started driving a red Honda tomorrow, a brand new red Honda, all of a sudden you start seeing more of what on the streets? Red Hondas. Question is, were those red Hondas on the street before you got your red Honda? Answer is yes. Why didn't you notice them before this? Because you didn't have a profile.
Last question for this, and we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. We are running a little behind time, so we would shorten the audience question time a little bit. What does a church do when it is confronted with a sudden vacuum, and there was no preparation, or there was whatever, but everything is sudden, and they have to find a way to fill the space, get going, be viable, and so on. How does a church transition in a sudden vacuum?
That's a great question. So every church, doesn't matter how small you are, how large you are, need what I call a catastrophic succession plan, in which the pastor gets, let's call it the word incapacitated. It could be moral failure. It could be death. It could be health. Anything can happen. So I have created a one-pager. I don't think that's in Tsunami, but I can send it to your office and your office can send it out. I have created a one-page sample document. And it says, first paragraph says, in the event so-and-so gets incapacitated due to, and I put some things over there. I would like these three people to be considered in that order. I would like for these three people, or five people, whatever it is, to make this decision. I would like for them to invite these two people, three people, as outside counsel to be part of that. It does not replace your bylaws. It should be in your bylaws. It does not replace your constitution and bylaws, but it gives a pathway. It's a catastrophic succession plan, and on there you also quote portions of your succession bylaws that is in there, because anything can happen. We're praying it doesn't happen, but anything can happen. And I've seen churches left in a very, very bad way, because now they start making emotional decisions. And the manipulative, dysfunctional people in the church will put their son, their nephew, their cousin in there. And it becomes a political thing rather than a thought-through thing. When I was at the university, I had that letter in an envelope. I wrote who my three were, the whole thing I just said, and I signed the edges of the envelope. I put Scotch tape on it. I brought my 5 executive presidents into the room, and I held up the envelope. I said, gentlemen, if I was to die or I was to mess up, open this envelope. This envelope is right here in my top drawer. So they knew. They wanted to know who. I said, that's none of your business. I'm putting this in. So when I left in 2003, I took the envelope with me. They all wanted to know who's in the envelope.
Yeah.
They never knew.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. We will open up for just a few questions because we're trying to make up the time. So Albert, will you facilitate that quickly?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our keynote speakers. So, Doc, let's start with a question for Dr. Chand from Stephen, who wants to know what is the ideal age to become a pastor? And that's for Dr. Chand.
To become a pastor?
Yes.
The ideal age? It's really nothing to do with age. It's when you're ready. And you may never be ready. I know some very mature 27-year-olds. I know some very immature 87-years-olds.
Thank you very much.
It's not a function of age.
Thank you. Doc, Jamila from Accra wants advice on how, and this is Dr. Otabil, please. Jamila from Accra wants advice on how to handle being a church member in a church in which the pastor's way of life leans towards expediency.
I mean, my view is, sometimes people make wrong judgments of an issue. So judging an action as expedient on the part of a church leader must not just be based on one occurrence. It should be based on a pattern that is observable not only to that individual, but generally observable. Because if that is what happens, everybody would know that's what happens. So if it's generally acknowledged that this is what is going on, that there is no real accountability to morality, to ethical behavior, to biblical lifestyle. The thing about church is it's a free society. We don't join churches by force. So if you think that the value system in the church is so incompatible with the standard biblical values, then you would have to make a moral decision as to where you want to receive your nurturing as a Christian. If you think the situation is redeemable, as Dr. Chan cited in his experience, you can talk to the pastor and say, sir, I've seen A, B, C happening. I'm not too happy with it. What's going on? The disciples of Jesus could question him as to why he would do something and not do the other. And he would take time to explain why he did what he did. And if the explanation fits the incident, in other words, it gives you a perspective where you see that, oh, okay, I saw it wrongly and I misjudged him, then of course you yourself have been redeemed. But if the explanation is such that afterwards you see the explanation is more expedient than the action itself, then you have to make a very bold call at that time.
Thank you very much. Before my next question goes to Dr. Chand, I would like to respectfully ask that you take your position behind the microphones. If you have a question here in person, kindly line up behind the two microphones in the aisles, and you can ask your question first with your first name and then your question. Dr. Chand, the next question comes from Charity here in Christ Temple East, who wants to find out, in your steps for the transition, why did action come before organizing? Because she feels that ideally it should be the other way around. Dr. Chan, she wants to know
yes,
why.
I think when you talked about pre-contemplation and contemplation, and then action
and
organization. She says, why does action come before organization, not organization and then action afterwards?
There is no organization unless you have pulled the trigger. The action, the decision has been made. And that is after that they're almost one and the other. You know, we can differentiate in our teaching, but once you made the action would be the decision. So there's pre-contemplation, contemplation, action, organization, and then momentum. So it's the whole notion of we act and then we organize. Because there's no need to organize if you have not taken any action. So, but I will not argue with you. If you teach it next time, flip it, and everything will be fine.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
But I think in the sequence of how he explained action, is taking the big leap. I mean, you take the leap before you start really getting things sorted out together. So the action it's more like a leap of faith.
So once Brenda and I concluded that I'm going to leave the university, then first thing I had to organize was my letter of resignation. Then I had to organize who will get that letter first. Then I had 18 board members scattered all over the United States, how I was going to communicate with them. Then I had to organize, I already had a successor in mind, he fit the profile, how I'm going to not only resign, but position him for them to accept him. So I had to organize all of those things. I had to organize accreditation. I had to organize with the United States Department of Education. You just don't leave. You have to create a plan for it. So I had a lot of organization to make, but I could not organize any of those things. There'd be wishful thinking if I had not made a decision that we're going to leave.
So they're interactive. I mean, there is a bit of organization in the action, and there's action in the organization.
Absolutely.
But if you want to just create a pattern, you think the action and the organization in terms of how the big picture works out in the next phase that you've entered
That's
into.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Doc, with your kind permission, we'll start from the left and alternate one
We
question.
can take, I'm sorry there are so many of you lined up, forgive me. You look all handsome and beautiful, but we can't take all your questions. So we take about 2 questions, and you can still stand by faith. You know, we are charismatics.
So let's start from the left. Your first name and your question, please.
Thank you, Doc. My name is Nana Danso. Dr. Sam said that what fathers do in moderation, sons do in excess. I want to ask, will this not be one of the reasons why charismatic Christianity in Africa has gotten to where it is today? Because most of the sons learned from their fathers, and it looked like they adored their fathers. So what their fathers did, they learned from them, and they are doing in excess today. And also, how do you get a mentor? Because it looks like, it seems difficult to...
Your question, I said 2 people. We are taking everybody's time. Go straight to the point. How do you get a mentor? Then you are out.
Thank you, sir. I'm done.
He knows how to answer the question. So the first question here, I don't really think it's a question. I think it's an opinion he expressed. So why sons, you said sons, what fathers do in moderation, sons do in excess. So the excesses in the charismatic church, isn't it because of the fathers? I think that's a self-answered question. So how do you get a mentor, isn't it?
How do you get a mentor? So you get mentors in many different ways. In many different ways.
Yes.
All the way from a personal relationship. You can be mentored by books, by podcasts, by webinars. There's so many opportunities. You don't have to know that person personally to be mentored by them. And nowadays, there's so much free information anytime you want to search for it. So the question is not how do you find a mentor. The question is what kind of mentor are you really looking for? So if for example, if it's a hands thing, if I wanted to be a better preacher, I would watch you. Because it is the kind of mentor that person is. If somebody is looking for growing deeper in the Lord, there are all kinds of resources on discipleship and maturity and guidance in the Lord that are available there. So you can find mentoring all day long, but people sometimes think, I've got to be with that person. They got to know me. That's not true. I've been mentored by people I have never met. I've been mentored by people who died centuries ago. So you can find mentors like that.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Anthony. My question is on syncretism, and that is the invasion of the African spiritism in the church. My question is, to what extent should the church embrace the African culture, since largely it's a way or it's a vehicle that carries some of these beliefs into the church?
That's a very difficult question. It's a challenge Israel faced, and there's a challenge the early church faced. The question of culture and religion. When you've been raised in a culture, you also somehow connect with its religious beliefs. So Israel was raised in Egypt. They were not raised in Israel, they were raised in Egypt. And so, although they were called God's people, they were Egyptians, really, in a cultural sense. The Israelites were Egyptians, because for 430, the culture they knew was Egypt. That was their language, that was their belief system, that was how they practiced. And so even after God delivered them, they struggled, because God wanted to create a new people out of them, a new culture, a new religion. But if you check the story of Israel, they never got Egypt out of them until they went to Babylon. Even as a nation, they couldn't get that culture out of them. So culture is a very powerful force. It can undermine belief in a very profound way. And that is why we Africans should be very mindful of the creeping in of beliefs, because it's so easy for your culture to destroy your Christian faith. It took Israel into captivity, into Babylon. It was only in Babylon that they discovered one true God and worship him truthfully in Babylon. If you look at the early church, I mean, the epistles, the Corinthian church, born again but very Corinthian. The Ephesian church, born again but very Ephesian. And they're struggling with all the belief systems that their culture has prepared them for. We don't throw away our African culture, because that's what we are. But we have to have sensitivity and discernment and doors to know that this is no longer African. This is now idolatry. And it happens. You give birth to a child. There are traditions, and within that, there's going to be some practice that is not Christian. You're going to bury a relative. Beyond just putting the person in a casket, there are other practices that are not Christian. And you find all of these things creeping in. There are expectations your culture places on you for you to know your future. And so when somebody dies, we have to consult something to tell us why the person dies. All of that is not just the culture, but the religious aspect of the culture. And if you are not careful and you become a Christian minister, your easiest path is to go there, because that's what the people expect from you. So if somebody's relative dies and I go to tell them, I prayed about it, and the Lord said, that man and that woman did it. Believe you me, they will not question me, because they are programmed to believe that this is what must happen. So it is my discipline as a Christian that would say, I will never participate in that, to reinforce something that their culture has prepared them to believe. And that is why sometimes I get on the case of those who claim to be prophets. There are only very few people who can properly claim it. Majority, I think they are practicing African fetishism. Majority. Because they meet the expectation of the people. The people want you to do that because that's what the culture has prepared them for. And you have to have the commitment, sometimes even when God shows you something, not to say it. Because in saying it, you are taking the people back into a system that God has to deliver them from. We have to be very... Nurturing Christianity is mostly countercultural. Christianity doesn't fit anybody's culture. It's against British culture, it's against American culture, it's against European culture, it's against everybody's culture. Nobody practices Christianity as a culture, because that is the biblical culture that even the people of the Bible couldn't struggle with. So you have to understand the struggle we have to go through if we truly want to serve Christ and let him be the Lord of our lives. And I feel that if we truly want to be global influencers of Christianity, then African traditional religion and its syncretist effect on the Christian faith must be exercised very boldly and robustly. If we don't deal with it, it will kill our Christian faith. It will kill our Christian faith. I think on that note, we would come to the end of this part. There's another session coming up, and you'll be told about it. And then in the evening, we're going to also have, we are doing back-to-back, because you're pastors. We have to give you all that we can within the time we have. And the evening, we're going to have Pastor Andre Olivier ministering, and Dr. Chand will come in, and then I'll have a discussion with the two of them as we have done in the evening. But right after our session in this afternoon, there is one coming up very shortly. We'll hand over to Pastor Albert.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Mensa Otabil, Dr. Sam Chan, let's appreciate them as they go down.
Please let the applause continue as they take their seats. Please, you may be seated momentarily. As we end the first session of the conference, kindly take note of the following reminders. We'll be taking an hour and 30 minutes break, after which we'll return for the afternoon session at 2:30 p.m. Please do take the opportunity to fraternize and get refreshed. For those joining virtually, the stream will end after some minutes, and the afternoon broadcast will begin at 14:30 GMT, 2:30 p.m. local time in Ghana. We encourage you to complete your registration at centralgospel.com/Doulos if you already have not. For those in person, the auditorium will temporarily be closed to make way for arrangements for the next session. And so, in view of this, we kindly request that you exit the auditorium with all your items and return with them for the afternoon session. This ends the morning session. Thank you very much. God bless you.